Okay, lesson 7.5, part 1 is properties of logarithms. Just a couple of things that I wanted to cover before we get into this. If you remember, when we were back in last semester, when we took care of exponents, we actually would add their bases, so x to the fifth. When you would actually subtract, so if I did x to the fifth over x squared, remember it ended up being x to the third. And then the other one was, if we raised an exponent to a power, you had to multiply them. So as we're looking at the properties of logarithms, if you remember, log base b uv, what it's going to turn into is, it actually turns into, we can split up the uv, and it becomes when you add them. So log base b, keep the number u the same, but log base b u plus log base b of v. So let's look at an example. If I did log base 6 of 3x, all this does is it turns into log base 6 of 3 plus log base 6 of x. Okay. Basically, you're just going to split this part up, write it as 2 logs, and you're going to write it as an addition. Okay? All right. Okay. So whenever we subtract, remember when we were actually subtracting, this bar means to divide. And when we would actually divide them, remember that actually meant that we would subtract their exponents. Okay? And remember, these things are going to equal the exponents. So actually, all we're going to do with this one is, it's going to be log base b minus log base b of v. So what you got to remember is basically anything that's on the bottom turns to a minus. So if I gave you log of, say, 3 over x, well, this one's going to turn into log of 3. And since x is on the bottom, it's a minus log of x. Okay? All right, next property is whenever you have log base b u to the v power, and you're actually raising it to the v power, well, this v is actually going to come right out front, so it turns to v times log base b of u. Okay? So in other words, if I had, say, log base 2 of x squared, this is actually going to turn into, this 2 just comes right out front. So it becomes 2 log base 2 of x. Okay? All right, so that's pretty much the 3 properties of logarithms. So remember that as a recap, whenever you're multiplying them, you're going to end up busting them up into 2 logs and adding the 2 logs. If you divide them, you're going to bust them up into 2 logs and subtract them. And if you have a power, you bring the power out front. So let's go ahead and take a look at an example. We've already done some of these, but we want to expand. And what I mean by expand is I'm going to write it into several logs. Okay? So basically, what I would do is circle your number. So you have 7x. Well, 7x means 7 times whatever x is. So you're going to bust that up into 7 and x. And since it's a multiply, remember multiply means we're going to add the 2 logs. So it's just log base 3 of 7 plus log base 3 of x. Okay? All right, so let's take a look at another example. If I gave you log base 4 of 7 over x. Well, remember, this is what we're trying to bust up. Since it's a divide, it turns into, we're dividing by the x, so it's just going to turn into a minus. So you write it as several logs. So log base 4 of 7 minus log base 4 of x. Okay? Okay. All right, and the last one, next one, we wanted to expand log base 5 of x squared. Well, remember, this is what we're actually working with. This just means we're going to write the several logs if we need to. But remember, when I have an exponent, it just comes right out front. So it just ends up being 2 log base 5 of x. All right, so let's take a look at one that would actually involve a couple more. Okay, so if you're looking at this one, log base 2, we've got several items here. So this is what we're actually going to be working with. And when you're expanding, you're going to write it into, again, remember, several different logs. So I have a 7, I have an x to the third, and then we're dividing by a y. So remember, when we divide, it's going to be the minus. So if you write those out, it might make it a little more helpful. So it's going to be log base 2 of 7 plus log base 2 of x to the third minus, since the y is under the bottom, log base 2 of y. Now remember, our exponents when we're expanding comes all out front. So your final answer would be log base 2 of 7 plus 3 log base 2 of x minus log base 2 of y would be your final answer. Okay. Now you could actually, in the process of writing this down, you could say, oh wait a minute, I can't have any x to the thirds. I want to pull that out front. So it is a case where you don't really need to write this step. This is the one that you would actually need to write. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and look at another example real quick on expanding. So we want to expand the log base 7 y over 3x squared. So this is actually the number. Okay. And anything on top, remember, we're going to write a y. We have a 3, but since 3 is on the bottom, remember, it's going to turn to a minus. And x squared minus x squared. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and show you the shortcut. If you want to write that extra line that we did in the last example, feel free to go ahead and do that. But I get log base 7 of y. And then since all of these were on the bottom, it turns to a minus. Log base 7 of 3. And then since x squared is on the bottom, remember, it has to turn into a y also. And remember, the 2 has to come out front. So 2 log base 7 of x. Okay, as your final answer. Okay. All right. The second part of this is when we're actually condensing. Okay. When we actually want to condense these problems. Whenever you see the word expand, you're going to write several logs. Okay. So expand, when you see the word's definition, you're going to have several logs. When you see condense, you're going to write a single log. Okay. So in other words, you're trying to get it down to one log. Okay. And here's the key. We have this minus here, so that automatically tells us that our two numbers, the 8 and the 12, are going to be divided. So you start with your log base 5 because we're going to write it as a single log. 8, since it's first, goes on top. And whatever comes directly after the minus goes underneath the fraction bar. Okay? And then since 8 twelfths can be simplified, you get log base 5. 8 over 12 reduces to 2/3. Okay? All right, so go ahead. So if I want to take, now since the directions say condense the expression, so we're going to get this down to one single log. So first thing is, we're going to write this. Remember, this has to come in, so it's a power. So it's x squared and it's 5. Okay, plus means I'm going to end up multiplying those. So it's going to be log x squared times 5. And remember, we typically will write our exponents first, our coefficients first. So we're just going to write log 5 of x squared. Okay? All right. Next example, we're going to condense the following expression. So we're still condensing. So let's go through and let's first of all, I don't have any number in front. This one turns to 2 squared, and this is going to be a minus. So that's going to tell us we're going to divide. So we need to do log 6, and 2 squared is just 4. So we can go ahead and do 6 times 4 minus, and whatever comes after the minus goes underneath. So your final answer is going to be log base 6 times 4 is 12 over 3. So your final answer is just going to be log base, or log 4. Okay. Oh, wait a minute. Let's start over a second. I made a mistake. 6 times 4 is 24, so log 8. All right. Last example for this part lesson, part 1, is So first of all, whenever we're doing this, let's go through and make sure we have any exponents. So the little 2 here, remember, comes in as an x squared. This one doesn't have a power. And this one comes in as y to the 3rd. Okay, and remember, any minuses are going to go under the fraction bar. Okay, and even though there's double minuses, they just simply go under the fraction bar. So our one single log is going to be log 8. We start with x squared. There's a minus. 5 comes after the minus, so that tells us it's got to go under the fraction bar. And then y to the 3rd comes right after a minus, so it's got to go under the fraction bar also. So that's what our final answer would look like. Okay. Well, this completes the video 1. Make sure you go ahead and watch the remaining videos. One is going to be on evaluating the change of base formula. Okay. All right. And those are really important. Moving on to lesson 6, 7.6, when we actually start solving equations with logs. Okay. All right.